been presented and level up our collective knowledge. So we're sort of more or less, or let's say just more at the same level than before to prepare us to go into the next couple of days and do the work we want to do. And I'll just start off with some really super high level questions, and we'll all go deeper together from there. And I think what we saw with the presentations and what I was really hearing is that a profound shift is underway. Is that from a kind of factory model, a top-down factory model of society to a network model of society. Also a different way of connecting with others, different patterns of interpersonal relationships. From groups that may be closed or have just a few links to open networks. Sociologist Barry Wellman calls this networked individualism. He thinks it's a fundamental change in our social architecture is underway. We're experiencing and living in that time and making that happen. And this this has profound implications for everything. Everything is up for grabs. Identity and reputation and laws, regulation, culture will be, I believe, sort of reinterpreted through this new paradigm of networks. So let's just start with a really basic high-level question. What is, and we'll start with you guys. What does decentralization mean to you?
Start on my I already put that about that.
Okay, so there's some new people that came though since you. Can you just 2 sentences on it?
Sure. I think that so this is a polarity management map, and on the left side you have centralized, and the other side decentralized, and there are complex having a lot of the push towards decentralization is wanting to have these benefits because they are occurring. But there are many good things about centralization, including wide scale, the ability to form of centralization, right? So we just made this map and looked at what are early warning signs that you might have too much centralization and next steps to shift that, as well as early warning signs that things are getting too decentralized. And the downsides of that are showing up too much and potential next steps.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's great. And it really, I think, very useful to show that there's no right or wrong, there's no good or bad. There is, the way engineers look at this is there's trade-offs from one design, principle or pattern to another, and that actually we need both of these, but maybe in the right balance and the right relationship. Chelsea, what does it mean to you, decentralization?
So I actually wrote something last night. I think I woke up pretty late and was like, okay, I just want to read whatever the thing is interesting. It struck me that looking at things through the lens of decentralization is a language and a way of looking at the world situations in business as interdependent and as an organism that relies on the rest of the system to make things work, which is sort of globalizing it, thinking about it from a different perspective, but that's what I think.
What's so cool about that is you're basically centralization is centralization without leaving anyone out. Because it's like we are all together and we're all part of the same thing. And so decentralization just means including everyone, like actually functioning as one single organism.
Right.
Like the Gaia thing.
Right.
So it's like
It's
just
really
healthy for people.
Okay. That's a perspective, yeah. Marcus?
Yeah, I mean, in a technical sense, it means you have a way of controlling your own digital identity and data, right? This can mean in a physical sense, like with the Freedom Box, you have a piece of hardware that gives you your own, makes you own your own part of the infrastructure, basically, where you have your data, your identity. It also means it doesn't have to be a freedom box. It can also be your computer or a smartphone or a server that you have somewhere. But it's something that's not the cloud as it is today, right? It's true that everything has advantages and disadvantages. Maybe we should have a balance, but today the architecture and protocols that we have are certainly not in balance. So we have everything in the cloud, and in the technical sense, it means moving away from that centralized side of cloud architecture. Maybe in a hardware sense with the box, often also in a software architecture protocol design sense to come up with the right stack that moves a little bit away from centralization, maybe not too far away, but a little bit in the other direction.
And why do you guys think this is happening now? Why are we having this discussion? Why are there so many experiments happening at this moment? What are the things coming together?
Tools, population, and how people connect, like with globalization and with technology. What the other talk was earlier about, like how groups, whether you're in a small community or then in a larger society, are able to communicate. Like we have certain biological abilities and things like reputation that are kind of like codes and tools that were possible in small groups. And now in large groups, we didn't have that many tools. Like we had law, like the judicial system, police, business systems and stuff like that. But now with technology and increased transportation and globalization, now we have new tools. So it's kind of like the third level of how can we better operate in a large society, but bringing back the small society concept of reputation and trust.
Right, cool. Yeah, so we've got a lot of new tools. What else?
This is something that Rachel, right?
Kalia.
Sorry. I think it's just this general disappointment and recognition of the way that centralized systems are failing. And so we're looking for the solutions, and we have tools that we didn't have 10 years ago, 5 years ago.
I think there's a frustration with the status quo, and there's a frustration with like feeling a lack of sense of like personal power. There's a huge frustration with government not kind of pulling through on what they say they're supposed to do. I think in general,
I think there's a danger too, though, right? Like I find it very interesting listening to this conversation. There's these themes that come up around like, well, decentralization is supposed to be about community, but then the word individual keeps getting trumpeted, right? And I actually think there's 3 poles that all are interrelated, and there's the whole society, government, and these big institutions. There's groups and there's individuals, and I still think we're talking about empowering the individual as if there's assumption that they're embedded in a relationship to communities, and I don't necessarily think they are. And I think we're talking, you look at Facebook. Facebook is designed for the network individual. All these tools are being built by young men under the age of 30, and their whole frame of their modality is to express who they are in a kind of projected outward form of networked individual. And feminine forms of forming communities and group are underprivileged in these systems.
Yeah.
And we actually have really weak tools for that stuff. And we need a relationship between individual and community on a local level, which is different than big government. And there's 3 things that are all interacting, and I think we're confusing them as one thing. But like we're confusing them somehow. Like the thinking isn't quite clear yet.
I think maybe we're just not including community and collective as a part of the conversation.
I think one of the things that's emerging now that is very related to what Bruce was saying is about the question of ownership. And I think there's been a problem with some sharing community technologies that are based on that things are based on rental through a platform rather than some form of collective ownership. And so I think the relationship between the autonomous individual and the collective is through some form of common ownership and decision-making process about that common ownership. And so I think that previously it was not possible to scale collective ownership without massive bureaucracy, and now with the technologies that we have, we can create efficiencies around managing assets collectively that wasn't possible before. And so I think that may enable more of this autonomy with an efficient relationship to the collective as a whole.
Yes, so we've got new tools. We have motivation, a lot of dissatisfaction with the way things run. I think we have some confusion about the idea between individuals and community, and there's a gender dimension to this. There's our ideas about ownership are changing, and how we can manage. There's new opportunities, and also sensibilities, values about how we should manage assets. And we have a comment there.
Yeah, excuse me. Part of this is, it seems to me that there is a subtle creep and acceptance of IoT. And IoT is, it can be brought into to really encompass the fact that most of us in this room hold a smartphone in our hand. If you showed a picture of what it looks like on Muni or BART from today and showed it to someone at the beginning of 2007 before iPhone showed up, everyone's face is buried in a vinyl slab. They would be like, oh my God, what is this wonderful world we've gone into? So there's this creep from 2007 to now, where it's like, okay, it's totally accepted. And in the meantime, we got smart TVs. You know, when smart TVs first came out, like, why the heck would you put a full CPU in a TV? What does that mean? And now it's like everyone's TV has built Netflix and Pandora and YouTube and all that. So it feels like there's a subtle creep, and we just kind of accepted it. It's like, not a big deal. It's just evolution, and it wasn't actually that long ago, right? And so it feels like there's this acceptance without a conscious decision on our part to say, yeah, this is going to be in my life, coupled with the Moore's law kicking in, or rather always being there, and things get smaller and faster and get embedded everywhere. So I feel like it's neither a good or bad thing, but I feel like that the only thing that's happening that I'm questioning is that it's subtle acceptance without an explicit understanding of what's going on.
Nice segue to what I wanted to talk about next, or us to talk about next, is what are the dangers? You know, what are the opportunities and what are the dangers? Kalia already spoke a little bit about that, and then you're saying we're not managing this technology in a shift in a very conscious way, making decisions about how it should be used and how it should be integrated in our society. What other kind of dangers do you guys see?
Well, coming from the other side, and they say we will have 200 billion IoT devices by 2020. Those are companies. They say, hey, this is a big thing, invest money, and they will want to sell another 200 billion, another 200. They don't want them to be like sustainable, like reusable or something. So the dangers of centralized society technology is that these systems work for like 3 years and then have to buy new ones, even if the devices themselves will be perfectly capable of being repurposed or being configured to do something else. So if you use open technology, for example, you can do this because data are.
But this gets to what, you know, those companies are being capitalized by people who want to make more and more money, right? And so we actually have to look at our sources of financing and funding, and also even what is money, right? And as soon as you get down to that, you're in really both deep philosophical and huge implications if you actually have a social conversation, because money is socially constructed. I can send you a bunch of links if you want to listen to how that's really true. And really, the value in our world comes from human beings, and it comes from resources on the land. We need to think, how do we rework our whole funding system? Because right now it's based on debt, and it's bet on ownership and exploitation. And so that's what's driving the funding of these IoT companies that then are going to have centralized platforms with proprietary data collection, sell the data about all of us so that other companies can go make more money exploiting us. Which gets to really deep questions.
But like these large transparent capitals, there's the centralized money.
Right, so fiat currency is one of the centralized things that's toxic and killing the planet.
Right, and you know, sort of what I'm hearing. There's a lot more that we can say about this, but just what I'm hearing is that there are really big opportunities for decentralization, but the same technology that can be used for decentralization can also be used in a different way to increase the control that those that are already powerful have. Yep. Right. Daniel.
There's when you brought this up before, community versus as opposed to individual, there's this layer of decentralization, but it doesn't speak to how people are still organized. It's really important. People who are disorganized and isolated and decentralized tend to be very vulnerable, and other people prey upon them. And that's what comes with decentralization. It's pretty terrible. It's, we're all alone with our iPhones somewhere, and Apple's providing Google. It's not such a happy, great world. It comes with tools to organize ourselves as communities in a decentralized setup, and that can be incredibly welcome.
I want to respond to two different things that Kara said. First, I think it's very smart, this noticing that there is something, there are three different things here. There is the individual, there is the tribe, and then there is the collective at large. And that misunderstandings about those relationships, like when are we talking about tribes, when are we talking about individuals, when are we talking about collective, and what all sorts of relationships there, that it really matters. And it's a very smart point. I had never thought that we can be right. Yeah. Then the other thing is like, okay, now about fiat. So how about you say, okay, now fiat is evil. I mean, of course, there is something evil that's happening in the world, right? But what about bringing in the decentralized together with the centralized here and having fiat and other currencies coexisting at the same time? And this can even add to the resilience of fiat as it's happening in Switzerland. And so. Yes. No. But I mean, conceptually, I mean, I don't know if this works or doesn't work. But it's like, okay, now where is the decentralized? Where is the centralized contribution to the decentralized that you're talking about? Yeah. Is that clear, what I said? Yeah. I mean, to you, yes. But everybody else?
Also, there's interesting opportunities as people have lots of tools, lots of connection with, they're pushing up against institutions, very long-standing institutions, the folks that have all the money. And it's very interesting to see so many of the women that I'm connected to have information now about what's really happening to their families, between food and air and medical care that actually set their children up to be sick in the first place, right? I mean, so I mean, I would have never thought that the white 30-something, 40-something woman in the Midwest with a picket fence was going to be like public enemy number one. I would have never told you that, right? And like they get it. So as they push up against it, at the same time, the biggest battles for losing your rights around your own health care are happening right now. So as they gain and influence information and power, the structures are trying to push them down. So there's this friction happening that's real, and with food and GMOs and toxins and chemicals. And so it's very interesting because at some point something's going to have to give, and it's like, where does it give? And when I watch some of these new collaborations happening with medical so like when Juan was talking to the brand becomes the owner. I'm a doctor with a brand from Harvard. When you see that, I mean, though that institutional, that kind of thinking is really pressing upon the people who are already pushing out, well, but we know this and we know that and we know this and we know that, but over here. So, so there's a very interesting friction happening, and things that still don't get out, right? The squashing. So there's somewhere it feels like a bubble is about to burst through. And I also had written about that concentration of wealth. I mean, the valley, the more and more, the promise of it all is more concentrated wealth to the same people that had it in the first place, now have more of it.
Right.
And
yeah, we see this in many spheres of our world, healthcare, technology, reputation, interpersonal relationships. What other threats or opportunities do you see, or dangers and opportunities do you see?
I see one danger is, for example, the reputation system. I think that's a very interesting danger, because reputation is like a little bit like many countries 5,000 years ago, completely decentralized. That's because of lack of communication, we couldn't centralize it. And reputation is a bit like that. As you said, I can trust you like a day or two, maybe I remember you, people I mean they don't know anything. Now if you network all this thing up, even if you completely decentralize technology, we're centralizing the source of reputation. The source of information for reputation. So just basically centralizing something with decentralized technology. So I see the threat that we have to be careful what we decentralize. Just the word, just do something in a decentralized way doesn't mean that doesn't have a centralized effect.
Olivia?
It's interesting to think about what we're decentralizing. Like, a lot of this coming from the tech world is, which I'm not a tech person, but what I see is a lot of tech people like sharing information, right? And it's like, this is what I figured out and I'm going to share it with you, and then you can use that information to figure your thing out. So when we talk about that, it's kind of like sharing ideas, which are public good, but which a lot of times, like, this is why people board, right? But then when we take that as our premier example for decentralization, what happens when we bring that then to like societal sharing, which is sharing of power, potentially safety, livelihood, well-being, decision-making that like affects our freedom and how we potentially like impede upon others' freedom. So then it becomes like a socio-political conversation where like what are the kinds of like government systems and legal systems do we have in place on a nation state level, and how is that obsolete now that we can connect with each other in ways that aren't geographically dependent? So I'm really interested in seeing like how do we take our inspiration from the decentralization of information through in the tech world and take it to like the societal level, and what governance structures that look like on a business level, on a neighborhood level, on a national and global level.
Yeah, I think you really point out something really interesting, which is we've kind of gone through this phase over the last decade or 15 years or something where our information-intensive industries have been reorganized with network technology, right, with the internet, et cetera. And that I think there's a lot of really great lessons to learn from that. I mean, one of the lessons is maybe we didn't have this kind of discussion, or they weren't the central, become the center of discussion to talk about these things about how power gets distributed, right? Because look at what's happened in the information-intensive industries. We have a set of monopolies: Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, right? And now this transformation is going deeper into society, into brick-and-mortar industries, old line transportation, healthcare, education, right? And I think the intention of venture capitalists is to set up the same kind of powerful monopolies, what they call unicorns, and these other things. So this is, there's a lot. I think there's a lot at stake right now.
It's interesting that when you were speaking, I think it's important to remember that the United States itself is actually incredibly decentralized. There's over 50,000 governments in this country at the local, county, state level. 50,000. And all of those are using old school, not all, almost all of them are using just plain old school, built by like white guys 300 years ago methods for interacting. Like Robert's Rules of Order. I don't know if you've ever been on a board that decides that's how it's going to run everything. it's horrific, and it means that people with all the power and connections get their stuff through, and everyone else is kind of out of luck. And there's a whole set of technologies that are about this that the tech world is just starting to pay attention to, that have been collected and curated and cultivated by the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation about how do we actually have a conversation, say, at a San Francisco level about gentrification and the impact of tech wealth on the city. That would be really interesting, but we don't. We end up with public meetings with people screaming, right? Because we haven't updated our technologies of power sharing and deliberation to understand at least how we operate at these levels.
Yeah, I found the discussion really fascinating, and I see 3 points maybe could be interesting for the discussion. The first one is a lot of discussion around decentralized DAO blockchain, and what will be discussed over the next few days is either on the political and social aspect, or in the development, software, and hardware aspect. And the third, what seems to be often missing when I'm meeting people who are working on it, and I would love to be able to see the discussion going on, and some people here have been starting to put the first cells on the discussion, is how do you apply it and how do you put it in people so you can create a really concrete prototype with it very quickly, because I see a lot of discussion and there is some great implication from the social, philosophical aspect and political. But how does, for example, the UAT with the riots can be empowered just tomorrow by people who are across the world who are following and can apply it? How does people can use Swarm to be able to implement their own projects? How do people can use Ethereum to be able to implement it? And even more than a lot of the application is here at the moment, and I would love to see people who've seen other fields are mainly in finance and juridical. And some of the things that we are trying to do is set up in other communities, especially now in France and Europe, are to be able to implement it to new fields. So mainly at the moment in science technology to create what we call decentralized labs. And we see a lot of research who pretty much have the same kind of constraint that you are discussing about the network aspect, which is we have the data, but they are pretty much locked somewhere. Either it's because it's a university and there is some grant, or it's a company and there is some patent. Or it's just some time, and that's some of the work we've been doing. Communities who just don't know how to share it, don't know how to document it, don't have the tools to be able to do it, and just don't know each other. And I find it really interesting with the decentralization aspect, but the autonomous aspect also is very interesting, because decentralization in a lot of discussion is about the network structure that you're going to use, but the autonomous aspect with a smart contract, either after you can add some layers like having some understanding of the information through a system like Watson and semantic webs and everything, can just give this information the capacity also to be decentralized itself without having the need of us. So one of the person was here to give a great example. I thought about having Uber, having Airbnb, having whatever service you want to use. The information itself is being stored in a structure that doesn't give you the freedom to be able to move from assets to assets. Right. And it's interesting because either you just work on the network or you work on how it's going to be applied for the people. And I would love, for example, to see them being able to use their project that you are going to build. Either, let's say someone is going to Los Angeles and is going to use Zipcar in the US, and after he's going to either get some cash or give some cash to someone because he is a driver. But when you get to Los Angeles, you need to go, let's say, in Airbnb. And so you will need, once again, to use the cash to be able to transfer it to one and to the other one. And I would love to see this kind of community being applied and to see how we can help this kind of community empower themselves with the technology very quickly.
Well, you had 3 things that you thought we should deepen our conversation with. Do you have a question for the group?
Yeah, how can we help them to be able to empower themselves with their technology as soon as they can? So it's not on the philosophical aspect question and standpoint, but it's on how do I prototype my things, I fail, I make it, and I improve it, and you have some really concrete cases that can be applied for either communities or people who have a real problem or real needs with it.
Right, let's move into that. That's a great question. Like, what, so what are our experiences in the room with decentralization, and what advice would we give others who are just starting down that path? Anyone want to jump forward with, a journey you've been on or what you've learned? And we've already heard from Juan and others in the Riot Crew. They have good stories. Who else?
academic connection because I love the project you are trying to do, especially to be able to apply it for the medical aspect. So we were at a conference 2 days ago called Economy Value, and it was really interesting to hear all these startups, especially in the Valley, who are working on trying to build their own application, to be able to open, build the tool, do the diagnostic for the people. But once again, the problem is the platform themselves don't really have the capacity to share the information to each other. I would find very interesting if your project could be connected with a web rival, and you have companies who are working on sensors who can do this kind of diagnostic and be applied for it. And that's a connection I thought would be interesting.
Cool. Who else? Any stories? Advice?
One thing I think if we work on technologies and we want them to have an impact, and one important goal has to be easy to use, right? There are so many technologies that hackers produce or that are made for hackers. You have to be a computer scientist or IT expert in order to use them. People have been encrypting their emails for a long time, and there have been decentralized forms of interaction for a really long time, long before Snowden and all that. But it's just usable for just a very small community of people. Facebook and Google, they're the McDonald's on the internet, basically. They're so easy, you just go there and it works. They have armies of psychologists and UI designers and all that to make it so easy to use, and that's difficult for us.
But we, in theory, have our own organization that actually has an open source mail client that has put zero money into it. It's called Mozilla, and the mail client's called Thunderbird. And I just got, after like spending 2 hours with my friend to get PGP set up on it, it's horrifically bad, the user interface. Why hasn't Mozilla spent $1 million of the like 300 million that Google has given it to make usable encrypted email? Right? We have that. And they haven't done it. And I think they should be held accountable by the community for not building that decentralized tool we all need.
Because I would use it.
Daniel.
Yeah.
That brings up a couple of things that I see in the problem of decentralization. One is a lack of accountability. No one's in charge of it. And a great real-world analog is, these situations where there have been 100 people watching while someone gets attacked and no one does anything, no one calls the police, no one calls the fire department, whatever it is. They say what you should do is point to one person and say you're responsible for helping. So when it's decentralized, a lot of these projects fall apart because no one gets the status for it, no one gets compensated for the time they put in, and no one, they find something else that meets their needs and move on. Same thing with getting volunteers for this. And another aspect of it is really the gaming aspect of it and protecting from bad actors. So you look at BitTorrent or other things that are doing peer-to-peer, you ended up with a lot of viruses coming in there, you ended up with a lot of people figuring out gaming algorithms so that they can kind of take over the networks and can build into it. You need these, it's probably up on that list already, you need these things, the accountability or at least incentive alignment between people, keep people motivated to move forward with the investment. For us over time, we've learned I shouldn't trust and spend my time on any of these things so all going to fall apart. I looked at 25 sets of tools over the last few months to help people develop software, of which 18 have been abandoned or open source projects, which still put a lot of work into it and just fell apart and they wanted something to pay for.
Right. So Kalia just added lack of accountability to our decentralized part of that ledger.
I've put a lot of experience along the same lines. I think, broadly within, the blockchain, Bitcoin space, there's a lot built on open source software and it kind of carries over some of the same dynamics. But, very clearly, it's possible, any kind of organization, particularly when funds are involved, for that to be misappropriated or someone decides that their, application to be is more important than building the next, whatever project milestone. But I think that
outside players, Google was the example that was used, will pluck some of the most important people from the ecosystem to destroy that decentralized network. So you take a few players, and you're going to give them $10 million to move out of this ecosystem they've been volunteering time into, they're likely to say yes, and it can collapse the rest of the ecosystem. Because what you're bringing up, unless you design it, can you design it in a way with incentives and otherwise so that is doable.
And there's been a massive problem around open source economics for a long time. If everyone just says, look at the Red Hat model, or something. I think we've been around these things. And Red Hat is, a company that produces Linux software, and the one successful example of a very, reasonably sized company to do it has a sort of service businesses on top of open source, and that doesn't work for a lot of projects. And it's nowhere near the scale of something like an Oracle or anything. That they're like all the largest sort of open source company is like sub 1% of their competitor in a kind of standard sort of comparison. But I think one of the really fascinating things about these kind of blockchain systems as they've evolved, and what we're doing is called crypto equity for a reason, we think it can be in certain cases a replacement for these these systems, is creating incentive structures that are sort of long-term success compatible. So rather than saying here we have something that's like, okay, we make something like today, or we make it off consulting on top of it, we can create dynamic and great systems, but then we say, okay, now we're building something and we're going to realize the value in 3 years, and we're committed to being here for all those 3 years, and that not only us who are putting in 70 hours a week working on it are going to benefit, but also all the other people who contributed in some small way. So, and that, I think, really compounds the effect. And this is sort of an experimental phase still, although we've been working on it for a year. But I think that really can compound the effect of having an open ecosystem with economic incentives. And if you look back on the literature of like the birth of the internet or a lot of the stuff early on, people point out all the benefits of open things, but then there's really never been like an open money, so to speak, that's like complements the openness of the internet. But once you have that, you actually have the ability to kind of program in the incentives that are appropriate to whatever project it is.
So this will be a topic tomorrow in open space, which is like, I think blockchain is bullshit for creating the kind of world we want, and I can explain why, but I think it's just an exchange mechanism between existing fiat currencies. And we actually have to peel away that onion and go back to where value is with people and with brands and mutual credit clearing in small communities, trust, and accountability. And that's not done by like all the people super into Bitcoin look a lot like Silicon Valley dudes trying to exploit people for a lot of money. And until that community has half women and close to majority people of color like the rest of the planet, it's not going to actually represent people and shift the systems and the underlying power dynamic.
All right, that's going to be a hell of a debate. I'm going to be like facilitating that. Joaquin, what's the time do we have?
Yeah, I think we could wrap it up now. Lunch is already delivered, so do you want to give like a closing round?
Yeah, just there's a lot of people that didn't get a chance to ask or say anything. So if you have that urge and didn't get to say something, this is your time.
Krista, go ahead.
I said something, but can I say one thing? I was just with Frank Moss, who was the head of MIT Media Lab, and he was telling me, he said, we've disrupted all the easy things. Cars and car sharing. So we've disrupted the easy things, but we haven't begun to disrupt the really deep, hard things. And one of the things he was saying was, he said, in this country, it's fee for services for healthcare. He said, well, what if it was outcome-based, right? So that's the total disruption that he's talking about and looking at. Like, Chinese medicine, like you pay if you get well. In China, right? You don't like pay to hope to get well. You pay when you get well. So I thought it was very interesting. So we've disrupted all the easy things. And so I keep thinking, if I only look at what we've already disrupted and then we just piece to the next place, then there's all this really deep, huge stuff underneath that really needs to be shifted and changed.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah, like money, and we've talked about some of the things.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think what you bring up is, I think is a really key point, is that this kind of work to decentralize, and you know, I'm more of an observer at this point than anything, but we've done, you know, feature stories on this trend, and what I see in each case is the kind of breakthroughs that we see out there were kind of years in the making. And there were a lot of dead ends and mistakes in the experiments, and that we shouldn't mistake that struggle as something that's bad. I actually think that struggle is how you make community together, is that you learn together, you make mistakes together, you have successes together, and then you arrive, like I believe in Spiral and some other communities, you arrive at a place which is very different and better, but it took a lot of work.
I feel like there's this weird paradox with decentralization, and maybe we're part of this, that there are some examples of decentralization which requires planning, and perhaps this summit is the planning part of it. And I'm in the solar software world, and the utilities that planned ahead 10 years ago for decentralized generation, distributed generation, they're like, bring it on, no problem. And then the utilities are like sitting on their ass for the last 10 years, like, no, we can't deal with it. So it feels like the planning part is it's important.
Right. Even if like the plans, you have to throw them out. You did a plan, and you got everyone educated about the challenges, you know.
Creating a general outline.
It looks like that, like most of the decentralization that has been happening with technology, and I think it relates to the blockchain point that you're making. It's like a yang decentralization, that things fall, that things get more and more fragmented in a way, and there is nothing holding this decentralization together. There is no glue there, and then that's how then things fall apart, the way they have been falling apart. Yeah.
And then women who do a lot of unpaid emotional labor to keep communities together are not paid for that labor. So if you look at open source, there aren't that many women, but the women in open source are often at the center of their community.
Right. Yeah, I've heard this term that you know, individuals are the shock absorbers of history. That you can take it even further and say that it's the women who bear the most of that burden for care, for people who suffer when things change or become unstable.
It's not about suffering. It's about unpaid emotional labor that's essential to making communities work.
She's saying that the value of like building communities or childcare or whatever is not captured in our current economy, and therefore
Or even in open source communities. So my own examples, I spent 10 years organizing the folks around user-centric digital identity. We're about to have our 20th conference. About 18 months ago, I was going to go grow vegetables because I couldn't figure out how to have a career. But all of these men have built organizations, companies, and used the emotional labor of my networking and connections and continuing to hold space by holding 20 events over 10 years. And I'm left with not much. It's not zero, but it's like, that's what you're talking about. These communities and these projects are held together with emotional labor, which is a fundamentally yin thing. Yeah. It's not just done by women, but
it's an invisible, right?
Well, it's
not
invisible.
It's invisible to our economy.
It's not intangible either. It's undervalued by our systems.
Yeah, it's not really.
Okay, and it's intangible because it's not a physical thing.
To bring this together, it seems like we need to, like, I don't know that much about interoperability, but it seems like it's important to bring it up right now because, like, in order for us to adequately decentralize, first we need to adequately decentralize our brains to, like, holistically include all aspects of, like, how we see ourselves and each other in order to make sure that everything is on the table, right? So, like, we're not only talking about money and technology and information. Like, we're also talking about sense of self. We're talking about our spirituality. We're talking about, like, whether we feel that we're going to get our needs met. And so underneath all the systems that we create is, like, do I feel healthy psychologically and sociologically and spiritually? And if that's not happening, then like I'm gonna start co-opting my power to like keep other people in their place so that I can make sure that I get my needs met. And then that's when hierarchical systems are created. So like at the end of the day, we just need to make sure that we all get our needs met. And whether that's within the monetary system or outside of it, it doesn't really matter as long as like all those transactions are liquid. So it's like we probably will always have different verticals where we're transacting different types of, let's say, information, care, well-being, sense of identity, community, whatever, like with different types of like transactional materials, whether like Chelsea's list, like whether it's barter or reputational, you know, whether you gain in reputation, whether you gain in money, in dollars. Like, I guess just remembering that if we leave anything out, then we're not going to have a fully functioning system. So understanding like the place of first like who we are inside and how we connect with each other and with our needs in order for the system to come from that.
I think that's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
Thank you.